I just recently did a video about OS2 1.3, which had a UI that shared remarkable resemblance to Windows 3.x. Being both a child of IBM and Microsoft, the latter was in the best position to bring their Windows software over to OS2, and so they did with Microsoft Word, Excel and even the Windows 3.0 Applets. Today we're gonna look at an early version of Windows NT. But did you know that Windows NT actually merged from OS2 and was rumored to become NT OS2 version 3? It's obsolete technology no one uses today, but I'll bring it back to life. I'm the Vintage Collector and these are my stories. When digging around winworldpc.com, I stumbled across this interesting bit here, the Presentation Manager add-on for Windows NT. In case you're not familiar with the Presentation Manager, that was the name of the graphical UI of OS2 release 1.1 through 1.3. Now, why would Microsoft support the OS2 Presentation Manager on Windows NT? As the PM package is only offered for Windows NT 3.51 and NT 4.0, I'm giving it a shot with NT 3.51 first. My guinea pig is the Expert 286 machine that was previously featured on this video here. I don't want to fiddle around with 22 floppy disks, so I took a CD-ROM version and copied the i386 folder onto the hard drive to perform a local disk-to-disk install. You'll find even nt.exe in the i386 directory. It offers various options even to create a floppy disk set. But we're not gonna do that. Instead, I'll run winnt.exe with the /b parameter for a direct install. During this era, Windows NT was still installable directly from DOS. So here we see the initial preparation routine, which will eventually perform a reboot before it comes up in the actual NT-driven setup. This one again will perform some file copying actions, so we get to see yet another progress bar before we finally hit the graphical UI, not without going through yet another reboot, of course. And this is where the madness began, as I forgot to connect the mouse. So I did a reset, reconnected the mouse, only to find this message on the next reboot. Oh well, I should have known better. Windows NT 3.x did obviously not yet feature resuming capabilities for the OS setup. So I went back to DOS and reran winnt.exe, which in fact claimed to clean up some temporary installation files. Hence I ran through the same procedure once again, eventually even getting to see some of the GUI setup. But wait a second, it didn't ask me anything, not even to set a new password. I don't know what exactly setup is doing here, but I have a bad feeling about it. And I stand confirmed, once the system rebooted, I do get a login prompt, but as I have no credentials, I'm essentially stuck here. So all good things are 3. I went to wipe drive C completely and start over again. But eventually I end up on the graphical UI as I had expected in the first place. If only I didn't bail out from it before. But at least you get to see the third file copying progress bar.
As if the two before weren't enough already.
And finally we end up on the login screen again, which this time admits me into the system. If you knew Windows 3.x, then Windows NT 3.51 will look very familiar, except that it comes with another accessory group for the administrative tools. From here, you can manage your system users, the hard drives, have a look at the system performance and even diagnose your system. Now, if you're wondering why NT started only with release 3.1 and why there was no releases 1.0 or 2.0, here's the answer. Microsoft intentionally released Windows NT Server and Workstation as Release 3.1 to put it on par with the then current DOS-based Windows 3.1. But that was not the only reason. If anything, the claim that there was no previous release of Windows NT is not fully correct, at least in a broader sense. It is correct that Windows NT is for the most a new operating system development, mostly driven by David N. Cutler of tech fame, whom developed the VMS operating system. As a consequence, Windows NT builds on many fundamental design concepts found in VMS. But that's only half the story. Windows NT included various subsystems or operating system personalities, 4 at the very beginning, to run classic 16-bit Windows applications through the Windows on Windows subsystem, DOS applications via the DOS VDM, POSIX text mode applications, so basically a Unix subset, and finally 16-bit OS2 text mode applications. It would be wrong to say that Windows NT is built on OS2 technology, but in the broader of all senses one may think of OS2 releases 1.x still as being a precursor to NT. To add to this claim, many resources state that when Microsoft and IBM parted ways from their previous joint development on OS2, IBM went on to develop OS2 release 2.x, whereas Microsoft took what once was called NT OS2. That's also the reason why the OS2 subsystem in Windows NT is limited to the release 1.x, as Microsoft had the source code only for that, and not the later OS2 release 2 branch. And to come back to the reason why NT launched as release 3.1. OS2 release 2.x was already out at the time when NT 3.1 came along. So it was only natural to put the version 3 in here to say, hey, we're one ahead. And while NT eventually ended up being something entirely different, it took some heritage along, not only the OS2 subsystem, but also support for OS2's HBFS, the high performance file system. But on a timeline perspective, this all happened in the period of around 1988 to 1993. Now, it's interesting that Microsoft released the Presentation Manager add-on for Windows NT only for NT 3.51, which came in May 1995, so roughly 4 months before the release of Windows 95. And again, for Windows NT 4.0 coming in 1996, the Presentation Manager add-on was also made available. To my best knowledge though, there was never a version of the Presentation Manager for NT 3.1, or at least none that is available and documented. What makes it interesting though is that OS2 was surely not strategic anymore for Microsoft in 1995, except maybe for one reason: to win over a deal for certain customers whom had previously invested into OS2 1.x and should be given a transitional option. That's the only reason I can imagine why this add-on exists. It comes on 5 floppies, and as opposed to other Microsoft products, it doesn't really look very polished, as it features only this very basic text mode batch installer. And while it seems a bit weird seeing OS2 files being installed into Windows, you'll end up with a new program group for the PM subsystem in Program Manager. As usual, reboot is required to get it up and running. As opposed to the real OS2, which had its own application launcher, this is fully replaced with the Windows NT Program Manager, and the icons appear here as shown. But you have to be aware that the PM shell has to be running, as otherwise, if you try running just any random applet, you'll get this error. So just be sure to run the PM shell first and you'll be fine. Running the PM shell just like this will switch over to another desktop where you won't find much. As opposed to the real OS2 where you'd have the desktop manager, kind of the similar thing to the Windows Program Manager to launch your applications, this is totally absent when running on NT. It's no big deal to run your applications from Windows Program Manager. However, if you intend to start multiple applications, you'd be always jumping forth and back between the two desktop environments, which you can do by simply clicking the small Windows NT icon on the lower right. Not exactly the way I'd define usability. It's a pity they didn't invest into seamless windowing mode, kind of similar as to what OS2 did with Windows 3.x applications in later releases, to have them appear on the native desktop. Now, the install disk for the Presentation Manager includes a README file, which gives also some hints on installing the real OS2 file manager, which unfortunately is not included with the package. Of course, Windows NT has its own file manager, but as a comparison, I took the OS2 file manager and copied the files over manually. I'll also create a program icon. Windows' own Program.exe already provides some icons, though I believe none is suitable. Let's see if NT's own WinFile.exe has something more appealing. Okay, this one looks decent. Let's fire them up both and have them side by side. This is really awesome, don't you think? Last time when I played around with OS2 1.3, I went into installing the OS2 Presentation Manager versions of Microsoft Word and Excel. Let's see how good the compatibility of the OS2 subsystem on NT really is, as if it can actually run these two applications. This setup process looks just about fine, the installers run through like a charm. As noted earlier on, the PM Desktop Manager is absent, so I'm curious to see what happens now, as it's asking to create the program icons. Now that's really nice. Microsoft obviously extended the PM subsystem in a way that the program group creation is intercepted and redirected to Windows Program Manager. So the icons are created here, although with some very generic icons, even referring to them being MS-DOS applications. That's sort of a missed opportunity, as at least they should have been including a generic OS2 icon in my opinion. And still, I think it would have been really nice to have the desktop manager on the presentation manager as well. Don't tell me this couldn't have been coexisting. To put it even further on trial, let's also install the Windows native version of Excel 3.0. As implied by the technical limitations how Presentation Manager applications are run on Windows NT, I cannot put them side by side directly, so I need to use again some video trickery. Nevertheless, it's totally fascinating to see literally one and the same application, compiled for different operating systems, running side by side on the same host OS, and this for 1995 technology. One may say many things about Microsoft, but these guys have really done a nice job here to make that work. I also wanted to give it a shot with the Presentation Manager version of Microsoft Word. And while it did actually install, whenever I try running it, it would quickly switch over to the PM shell and immediately drop back to the Windows desktop. Something is definitely wrong here, but let's leave it at that. At least that's what I thought, though on the next reboot I get this error, which is directly related to Windows NT failing to load some dependency that was introduced by the OS2 version of Microsoft Word. I recovered from this situation using the last known good recovery option on NT's boot manager. My last video on OS2 1.3 also featured the Windows 3.0 applets for OS2, which were made to run using the Willow compatibility layer, not too different from the Wine ABI implementation in later years. It totally fascinated me how this made the Windows native applets run in OS2, and I wanted to really push it now and see if I can actually install and run these applets on Windows NT as well. I know that this is kind of pointless, as Windows NT 3.x includes the very same applets already, but it's all about the demonstration purposes. The installation again is CLI driven and runs through. But guess my surprise when I saw the applets running on the Windows native desktop. I would have expected them to switch over to run on the OS2 presentation manager instead. But just by seeing this, it implies that the compatibility layer introduced by Willow on OS2 just intercepts the Win16 API calls, with the applications remaining widely unaltered. Otherwise, I cannot reasonably explain why the applications would remain on the Windows environment to which they are native. Maybe it's worthwhile to drill down if the actual binaries are the original ones that came with Windows 3.0, unaltered, or if they were in fact linked against both the Windows DLLs and the Willow DLLs, making them real hybrid binaries.
Actually, the installer claims exactly this, that the binaries were specifically linked.
Correct, but even without exploring this at this point, I believe that the statement is only true for things like the included main DLL files, like kernel, GDI, user, but not necessarily the included applets. I'm pretty certain that only the main libraries were linked against OS2 specific DLLs, whereas the applets themselves just link to the standard Windows DLLs, thus making them unaltered. I may be wrong and probably am, and it definitely goes too far for this video, as there's one more thing I'd like to explore. So far you saw the PM subsystem must be started manually before you can run any applications. The already mentioned README file on the PM setup disk also covers some means of starting the presentation manager as a service. While it mentions where the required files are found on floppy disk number 4, it's odd that one of the two files is actually installed and the other one not. I do as told and create a new service named OS2 PM subsystem like so. The README provides additional instructions on what must now be configured in the system registry. I'll add the parameters key and the two values for app directory and start PM shell, as all I want is to pre-start the presentation manager subsystem. Starting the service via the services control panel seems to have the desired effect, running it now as a persistent service. And now I can simply run any applet like the PM control panel, which will then launch into the PM shell as usual. With the presentation manager now running as a service, let's see what happens when I log in with a different user. See how the PM shell icon appears in the lower left corner. And I can jump directly into the PM file manager right away without needing to care if the PM shell is already running or not. Same goes if I log back into the administrator account. With that being done, I do hope that it will now start the PM shell automatically so I can use it right away. And here it is. On the next startup, os2.exe is being launched automatically when I log in. But what's that? The screen suddenly went dark. Okay, it's not an issue with the monitor, but I think I crashed my NT. Can it be? But even the second attempt ends up in the very same situation. So eventually I was going again for the last known good configuration to bring the system up again and revert those last service related changes. I guess I need to dig in further on what was going wrong here. Okay, I was pushing it to the limits, so it's no surprise it broke. But I broke it like 4 times through the entire process. Can you believe it? Still, I think you got the idea about the multi-OS personalities that David Cutler and his team envisioned for Windows NT. It's quite progressive for the time to have an operating system with no less than 4 personalities: Windows on Windows 16, NTVDM, OS2 1.x and POSIX. And Windows NT 3.51 did not only feature the 16-bit Windows API, but also the revised 32-bit API, which was about to be introduced with Windows 95. And yes, this is an original factory sealed item. Nowadays, we can do literally everything using virtualization, but for the mid-90s, this was really ahead of the time. So long, I'm the Vintage Collector, and this was my story on Windows NT 3.51. Thanks for watching, and see you again next time. If you check out this channel's community tab, you'll find some polls on potential upcoming videos. You're very welcome to upvote on upcoming topics or drop in new ones you'd like me to chase down.